had a number of friends who were academics, and we worked together. I first ended up at Harvard, where I worked with Leonard van de Kuip, who's still our chairman, and Janet Gatso. And we started publishing electronically these texts. We distribute them not as books, but as external hard drives. Now, of course, we can do it by the internet. But, of course, the internet produces special problems because you need to have the internet. And the internet in Asia is not sometimes very convenient. So now we're working on distributing the hard drives with the database already on it.
So let me get a picture of this here. So you have these ancient texts now.
The ancient texts were reprinted in India, Bhutan, Sikkim. Then the paper that we printed them on was not going to last. So the idea was, well, maybe if we could preserve them by digitizing them and taking those digital images and just distributing the digital images.
So you distribute an actual hard drive. So somebody opens their mail and opens...
Put it on their computer. You can also download it from the internet.
And so where exactly have these drives ended up so far?
Well, we have two projects. One is to make them available to universities. The universities that are in the United States that have joined are Harvard, Columbia University, Yale, and all of the major universities, Library of Congress. And then we have the more exciting one, which is to distribute them to the lamas themselves, the lineage holders. So those we distribute freely. And because they're in the developing world where access to the internet is not as good as it could be, we make them available as so-called lineage drives, which has the database built on it.
Okay, so how many texts are on a lineage drive?
Well, we probably have a Kanjur, a Tengyur, and then all of the major teachings of each tradition, divided into Sakya, Nyingma, Kagyu, and then we've been helping the Bombos do their own.
So lineages in Tibetan Buddhist schools.
Yes. We're doing this so that we can make them available. You know, they're not going to be the everything that lineage has. It's what we have scanned, what we found, and what we've scanned. So remember that we have a library of 12,000 to 15,000 volumes, of which we have scanned, and these are what I think are the most important. We scan now 6,000.
So you have quite a bit more work to do.
Yes, and we're working closely with the Khyentse Foundation. The vision of Dzongsar Khyentse Rinpoche was to reconstitute one of the greatest libraries in Tibet, the library of Dzongsar.
Why do you feel it's so important to make these available now?
If we don't, they're going to be gone. You know, every year, texts disappear. When I first started in India, and I suppose still, people will use them to paint miniatures, take the pieces of the book and paint around. It is, mutilation of them. In the past, many of the books got into the hands of other schools. So a book that that was important to the Sakya might have ended up in the hands of somebody else who didn't know what it was. Books in Tibet depend upon a lineage of transmission. You have what are called wongs. These are teachings that give the practitioner permission to use the teaching. You have lungs. When you go to a Buddhist instruction, the Lama will read the text, and it's passed from teacher to student. For example, we've been attending the Khyentse teachings on the Uttara Tantra, and each verse he will read, and then that you've received that verse. He's very careful to make sure that it's read in Tibetan.
Making these available before they actually expire, how many texts are still potentially recoverable in places like Nepal and Tibet itself?
Many. They're constantly finding new collections in Tibet.
New collections of ancient
texts.
And when you say ancient, how far back are we talking?
Well, the oldest texts that I've ever seen were from the 8th 9th century. Lots of them were found in the caves at Dunhuang. But the kinds that I'm sort of interested in most are the materials that were the early block prints. Remember, they were carving blocks as early as the 12th, 13th centuries. And, there's an incredible amount of that that's still around. And then, of course, the manuscripts.
Well, I'm curious to know more about this tradition of printing in Tibet and the importance. Is it a specific practice on its own? Like, is there a whole ritual around just printing these texts?
No, not really. There's no ritual around the carving of the blocks. There's a very great ritual on the relationship of the patron to the block carvers. But the books themselves are done by somebody who says, look, my teacher has taught me this, so I should make sure that this particular manifestation of that teaching survives. Then you have these people taking vows that I will carve them. Now, they're not commercially distributed. The blocks are kept in, because you got to remember, each page is about a pound. The block for carving it, carved on both sides. Can you imagine 8,000 blocks? It's a pretty big number of blocks. And you had these great state printing houses like Dege, Labrang. That survived. The Labrang printery survived. Kumbum.
So they actually have like a printing house within the monastery.
And then you had rich nobles. They would carve their favorite teachers' writings, and those would be kept in the house. And a person who would go around if they wanted books printed, they would take their own paper, their ink, and they could only be done in a certain time of the year. You can't print in the winter because the blocks will crack because you use this ink, and you'll go around. You have to take your own paper, your own person who can print, and that's how it was done. If you went to a monastery printing house, you had to sponsor a tea party, which is one of the ways that a monastery would make its living, is through the monastic tea party. It's interesting to see them. You can see them still carving at the great printery of Dege. Dege was the great cultural center.
Now, within these monasteries in the regions of Tibet and other regions, are they continuing to practice this way, or have they switched over to cyberspace?
They switched over to ink print, to book style.
Okay.
Because it's very inconvenient. But yet many Tibetans still want them in the traditional style. They fit nicely across your lap.
The good news is that if you can do this faster, more people can have access.
Yeah.
So the question I have is, for example, within the preservation world, it's kind of high-level scholarly level. So is there an effort being made to help the regular person like me figure this out, or be interested even in having access? How do you, who is this geared towards?
It's geared toward, there are several people. It's always, whenever you make a change, whenever you copy something, there's always a great danger of introducing error. And what we're doing is trying just to make things available as they were, not trying to edit, not trying to translate, just trying to make them available as they are. Inputting them using a computer to input and then print out either as traditional pecha or traditional cricket bats. They're usually about 12 to 16 inches narrow. Or now many monasteries are printing books, and it's becoming very important to print books. The great publishing houses now in China and India are producing these books. You'll notice that we've just been to Khyentse Rinpoche's teaching. The blue book and the yellow book, those are books, not pecha.